And good evening, and welcome to the Monday night edition of the People Show with yours truly, Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator every Monday night on intellectualradio.com, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X, formerly known as Twitter. For the first hour of the program, we are on Instagram, and then, of course, for the remainder of the program, well, on all of the social media outlets, including iHeartRadio, along with intellectualradio.com. And we certainly thank intellectualradio.com for facilitating and allowing us this time to share with you. We have a great story that I was going to talk about, and we probably will talk about it because I think that it is important that we talk about our democratic process and our democracy, and certainly want to talk about those ideas that I promoted to you earlier about having this purist attitude that Black voters and part of our Black electorate are taking in this election, and how dangerous that is for the democracy and for the advancement of Black people as it relates to public policy. We can't have a short-term view about this. We have to look at things in terms of what we're going to do in the short term for the long-term gains. Those are things that it is important for us to do. But it is also important to be extraordinarily informed, not emotionally engaged, and for people who would propagate misinformation and disinformation. And disinformation is people who are willfully putting out misinformation or untrue information for the purposes of derailing people or derailing a process or derailing democratic norms. That's disinformation. It's a willful intent to do it. Misinformation is people who just don't know and put out information that they haven't verified or know to be true. Both are very dangerous. And people who have access to platforms and people who have access to media, such as local media and radio and those types of things, need to be very, very careful about what they're doing, because especially when you put out information that is factually incorrect, you do significant harm. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Next week on the program, we're going to have a panel of Black lawyers and judges that are going to talk about the recent conviction, the trial, the investigation, the grand jury, and the entire process of our judiciary and the judicial process as related to the now criminally convicted Donald Trump in the 34 counts that he was convicted on all 34 counts, 12 juries of his peers. We're going to be talking about that just a little bit tonight, but we're going to have a panel next week that is going to join us to talk about that. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting conversation. It'll be very informative, and certainly look for you all to be here. But we have to really understand the times that we're in politically and understand what has transpired, what kind of policies have passed, and how those policies are for the long term going to be beneficial to people in Black communities all across this country. And the juxtaposition to what the previous administration and the person who was running for president again and what they are interested in doing. They're not interested in governing. They're not interested in governing. And the people who know how to govern, that are fealty to Trump, are people who just want him to be there because they do understand that he will be there in name and signature only. They will be the people who will be determining policy, and he will be signing it into law because he does not have the aptitude, nor does he have the discipline to do so, because that's not what his interest is. So understand why he's being supported by the people who are already in government, who have an understanding of how government works on that side of the aisle. Not that they're supporting it because they think he's so brilliant. They're supporting him because they know that he is not so brilliant, and that they will be the people who will be making the policies for him to sign into law. That's what that support is all about. But it's also dangerous because they want to undo policies that for decades have misrepresented and underrepresented communities of poor people, and certainly communities of color. Now, it is beyond any rational understanding, and I challenge you and will challenge people every single time to bring policy that Republicans have passed, that they have brought ideas, that they have crafted, and that they have passed on behalf of working class, poor, and Black people in this country in the last 50 years. Just bring one policy. Nobody has done it to this point. Nobody has done it. You know why they haven't done it? Because it does not exist. It does not exist. Even policies that were signed into law by Reagan and Bush and Trump were policies that were brought in as a result of Democratic leadership. Democrats. Ronald Reagan signed Dr. Martin Luther King's federal holiday, but he didn't want it. He opposed it. But it wasn't brought by the Republicans. It was brought by the Democrats. But he signed it. Donald Trump zeroed out economic support to minority and HBCUs in his initial budget, and it took Alma Adams from South Carolina and Walter Kimbrough, a former HBCU president, two-time president, that had to help them to understand the importance of those dollars, and those dollars were only, depending on how you look at it, $250 million. This administration, in 3.5 years, have given more to HBCUs than all of the other presidents combined. $16.5 billion, with a B, $16.5 billion to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and has sent a letter to those states that owe HBCUs billions of dollars of matching funds that has been discovered that they have not been providing or giving to those universities. Just a few. As I said to you, we're going to go through some of, or much of, over the next 100 and some odd days prior to the election, of what this administration has done and the importance of it, and why we must support the re-election of the Biden-Harris administration to continue pushing to continue pushing the party and the administration that we can push to get things done that is going to be beneficial to Black communities all across this country and to the country at large. Not some holy alliance, but working and understanding where it is that we could work with and people who actually are open to doing and putting policies into place that will be beneficial to our communities. Now, it doesn't mean that we vote and go sit down. We have to push. We have to continue to push. But the other side has no interest, which is why they are purging millions and millions of people off of voting rolls. Like what they're doing down in Georgia, that women have to be able to show an ID that matches their birth certificate. So that means that women who've gotten married that have taken their husband's last name, which 90% of women who get married do that, will not be able to register to vote if this law is passed. These are Republican-led initiatives. So if Republicans, by any stretch, were really interested in expanding the democratic process and doing things for poor people, then they would be making it easier for people to vote. The reason why they don't want people to vote is because if more people participate in the electoral process, they do not vote for Republicans. This was started by Paul Weyrich, who in the Southern Christian leadership, who was the founder and the initiator or organizer heavily in the Reagan campaign and administration, who clearly said that they didn't want for people to vote. This is what the Republicans' agenda is about you participating in elections.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
That's what the Republicans' idea of winning election. They don't want everybody to participate in the election. Yes, you heard it right, and I'm going to give it to you again. This is Paul Weyrich and what he thinks and how the Republicans think about election.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Elections. So we have to be very, very careful. We have to be very informed, and we have to understand that we cannot have this purist attitude when it comes to elections. I see and saw some Black people in Chicago running around with Trump shirts on, which just tells us, well, certainly tells me, where their information quotient is. I'm not talking about anybody's intelligence. I'm simply talking about being properly informed with the factual data and the information. We get upset because we don't agree with some things or something that a person who is in public office does. I would ask for anybody to find somebody that you support, that you are going to agree with 100% of the decisions that they make. And if you don't agree with those decisions, you should challenge them. You should challenge them and you should push back on them. But you have to have a much broader perspective and understanding of how this process works to suggest that if somebody does some one thing, or that you are looking for every negative opportunity to discredit someone because they were not the person or not doing something that you wanted them to do, or they did something in opposition to something that you thought they should do. Oh, we have that problem. It's happening now. It's happening now. And if those people you talk to, of those people who are leading those individuals who are upset and they think that this is the way to fight back, or they think this is the way to make progress. It isn't. It's ill-advised and it's misinformed. But we're going to talk about that. I have, this was sent to me by one of our committee people, and it is a phenomenal story. Fawn Weaver, who is the founder of Uncle Nearest, or founded Uncle Nearest to honor the formerly enslaved master distiller who taught Jack Daniel the secret to making great whiskey. 7 years later, she owns the most successful Black-owned liquor empire worth $1.1 billion, with ambitious plans for the future, including real estate of the Weaver's 40% stake makes her net worth $480 million, landing her at the number 68th position on the Forbes richest self-made woman list. This was something that was sent to me. I want to share it with you. It's a very powerful story. It ought to be a very encouraging story for us, but I want you to take a look at this.
People ask me all the time, what do I want my legacy to be? I don't care. If 3 generations from now, they don't remember Fawn Weaver lived, I don't care. And that's the interesting thing, because I'm so passionate about cementing the legacy of Nearest Green, but I don't actually care about people remembering me. Maybe that's why I'm the steward of this story, that I was chosen to be this generation's baton holder of this story and building this brand to pass it to the next generation, is because I don't think about myself in the process at all. As a kid, I don't know that I would say I was entrepreneurial. I would say that people would have called me rebellious as they did. And I think most entrepreneurs would have been called rebellious as their kids. So maybe it means the same thing in childhood. If someone called our house, we would have to pick up the phone and say, it's a great day at the Wilson house. How may I help you? Well, what do you do if it's not a great day? And so I was that child that was like, I'm not going to say it's a great day. I'm not having a great day. And so there was just a nonstop battle with myself and my parents. And at the age of 15, they had a new baby girl, and they wanted to have an opportunity to raise her without there being a negative influence in the house. So they sat me down, and it was a, sort of shape up or ship out type of conversation. It was very much so, listen, we want to have the opportunity to raise her without you negatively impacting her. And so you have two choices. Either you do what we are now telling you to do as your parents in this household, or you have to leave. I think I was there another hour. My mom says she remembers me leaving out with a backpack and a lunch pail. When I left home at 15, I dropped out of high school not too long after. And so I found myself at a place called My Friend's Place, and it's for young people. And then the only place that had a bed for me was Children of the Night. When I turned 18, I could no longer be at Children of the Night. So they moved me to Covenant House. And so at Covenant House, every day you go out with your resume, you go out and you look for a job. It's a requirement. You either have to go to school or you have to go out and look for a job. I went out the very first day, and I came back, and we have these campfire things that you would do. And everyone around the campfire was lamenting about how hard it is to find a job. And they went out and they put out this and that and this and that. And I sat there silent because I went out and came back with 4 jobs. And I sat there and I was like, okay, I'm different. Beginning my first business at 18, I started with 2 clients, both paying me, I think, $5,000 a month. I thought I was really rich. But then you learn that your top line and your bottom line don't mirror one another if you hire a whole bunch of people. And I think I had between part-time and full-time, 10 people working with me, and I only had 2 accounts. And so it was very quickly before that ended up getting pared down to just me, right? Which is what most PR firms are when they're beginning. So now I'm finding myself on couches again. And at the age of 20, decided to try to take my life. They had to pump charcoal through my nostrils, and I will never forget the feeling of it going through cartilage in order to pull out all of the pills that I took and the alcohol. I remember sitting there and listening to the doctors talk around me, and I remember laying there and going, I have got to be here for a reason, because I've now tried to take myself out twice and have been unsuccessful both times. And so literally laying there in that hospital bed, I committed myself to figuring out, why am I here on earth? Back in June of 2016, on the cover of the New York Times International Edition, I saw this photo of this Black man sitting to the right of Jack Daniel. I wasn't a Jack Daniel drinker. I had no idea who this Black man was, but Jack Daniel is one of the most ubiquitous brands around the world. And so I knew what Jack looked like. And the headline said, Jack Daniels embraces a secret ingredient, help from a slave. But then when I began to dive into the story, something else began to be peeled back. That photo, taken around 1904, that photo was cropped. I got the original photo. That Black man isn't just to the right of Jack Daniel. That Black man was centered.
An incredible story. That's just part 1. I never knew this. I don't know if any of you ever knew this, but this is a 48-year-old woman who is telling us about the history of Jack Daniel's whiskey and what she has done to bring the truth of an enslaved distiller to be honored. She's not looking for her to be remembered, but she's looking for the history to be recognized. which is so vitally important. It is so vitally important to the analysis to our times today, to where we should be, to where all of us should be, because it's not about us individually, but it is about us collectively doing the work and serving for good, for the improvement of the whole. The story continues.
So even though we don't have a photo of Nearest Green, the person who he ceded the center position to is Nearest's son, George Green. Nearest Green was not only the teacher and mentor of a young Jack Daniel, he was the first master distiller for Jack Daniel Distillery. And Jack Daniel Distillery's original distillery number was distillery number 7. Nearest Green is the only known master distiller to ever operate at distillery number 7. I thought, if we can prove this, this changes everything. Because for African Americans for so long, the way that we have seen ourselves, or the way that we've been portrayed, is that these enslaved people came in and they were uneducated. That is not true. They were educated in their own country, in their own language. And so for my 40th birthday, I decided I wanted to go to Lynchburg, Tennessee. I want to see if what I think is true, which at the time is completely opposite of everything that was in social media, everything that was in the press at that time, was Jack is a slave owner, he stole the recipe, he hid the slave, they've tried to hide this for the last 150, 160 years, and I had a completely different theory. This is a story of love, honor, and respect, and it's an ally who wanted to make sure America could not wipe his friend away, his mentor away, this insignificant person away. One of the first people that we meet in the library, when I'm sitting there across from my husband doing research, is the second eldest living descendant of Jack Daniel, who offers to help, who literally pulls out her cell phone and gives me the name and number of Nearest Green's descendant who had been doing genealogy research for 30 years. And then she said, hey, you know that book that you read called Jack Daniel's Legacy? It's his biography written in 1967, height of the civil rights era. And you have this white reporter from Alabama comes up, interviews all of the people who knew Jack best. And they include Nearest and his boys more time than Jack's own family. In 1967, if you didn't want to credit a black man, you just left him out of the book. You left him out of the story. I shared this with Jack's descendant, and she's like, yes, we all grew up together. The story that's out there is not the true story. And so in that book, a lot of it takes place on this farm, this 313-acre farm right in the hills above Lynchburg, Tennessee. And she says to me, hey, you know that farm? It's for sale. At that time, I thought this could be a book, this could be a movie. Within a week, we had made an offer, it had been accepted on that property. And now all of a sudden we're going, well, what are we gonna do with this? The realtor who took us is a descendant of Jack Daniel, who took us to see the house. Turns out she had been in the family business her whole life. She had retired after 31 years as the head of whiskey operations for Jack Daniel. And she says, hey, I know you're gonna do a book and you're gonna do a movie, but if you ever decide to put his name on a bottle, I'll come out of retirement to make sure you get it right. The serendipity of everything that was happening, the only thing I could do was literally look to the heavens and go, all right, Jack and Nearest, what are y'all doing up there?
Okay. If you have watched the first 2 segments of this, and you are like me, you are shaking your head. Now, I've heard of Jack Daniels. I've never drank liquor in my entire life. Never had a drop of alcohol ever. I've had classmates, friends, people, and especially where I grew up in the 70s, in my high school years, Jack Daniel Jack Daniels, whatever brand whiskey was a thing. They used to have, I forget what they called it, but they used to put Jack Daniels in orange juice, and I forget what the drink was called, but whatever it was, it made them stupid drunk. I can remember many of days having to drive people home because they couldn't drive because they were so drunk. I think I've had a couple of episodes of people actually losing it in my car from drinking. And so I don't know if that is what got me from, or kept me from even wanting to explore it, by seeing what other people were going through in terms of taking an alcohol, anything that would compromise anybody to that level. I didn't want to be, and I didn't want anything to have that kind of control of me, that I didn't know what I was doing or didn't know where I was waking up the next morning. But this story about this enslaved distiller is just remarkable in what she is doing and has done to make sure that he is recognized and honored for making Jack Daniel who Jack Daniel was. Here's the final part of that story.
What helped me to find my purpose, or allowed me to live so that I could live in my purpose, is the same reason we are talking about Mears Green's legacy today. Because the only difference between Kentucky bourbon and Tennessee whiskey is what Mears Green taught: charcoal filtration. Truly, it was the same charcoal being utilized to purify my body after a second attempt at my life.
When we began this, we knew that there had never been an African American, a Black American, to succeed in founding and leading a spirit company in the history of American spirits. Now, mind you, American spirits have been in our country for over 400 years, and never once was there a Black American that had ever succeeded. We have a lot more money these days, and so our buying power is strong. And as our buying power has gone up, we've become the face of all these brands, but we didn't own it. And so the question was, why? And I didn't have that answer, but what I knew is this industry wasn't set up for me to succeed. So every time someone would give me advice, I would completely disregard it and do the opposite. So everyone told me, you should start in one state, build over the next 4 years or so in that one state, and then try to pick up the states that are adjoining it. I went to my chief business officer and I said, I want to be in all 50 states by the end of the first 2 years. Why? Because there's a reason that strategy has failed us. Even investors that I have brought in were like, Fawn, why would you invest so much in a distillery when none of these other bourbon brands are spending that kind of money, put all that money into marketing? And I looked at it and said, the home place for Uncle Nearest, Mears Green Distillery, is going to become the best marketing tool that we had. So I announced, we're going to spend $50 million on building out a distillery. We weren't even 2 years old. People are like, this woman is crazy. Like, legitimately, this woman is crazy. She has no idea what she's doing. She's going to fail. And quite frankly, if you look at the moves I was making, I should have failed. But they were the right moves. And so we were able to transition very quickly every single time an obstacle had come our way, because we owned the land, which meant we truly owned the brand. And so many of the bourbon companies that have come before us that sold, they didn't sell because those founders wanted to. They sold because they had to, because they ran out of enough money to be able to lay down enough bourbon. And for us, we began investing in assets so early. Bourbon goes up. So if I put it in at $750 in the barrel and I can sell it a few years later at $1,600, guess what? I can find investors to invest in that. I can find banks to invest in that, because that's real property. This land is real property. These buildings that we have built, real property. having a Black-owned company pass to the next generation, we've not done that. Every generation of Black Americans have started from scratch. Every single one. And now we have the opportunity to set the next generation up to not have to start from scratch. Diageo, Bacardi, Brown-Forman, LVMH, every single spirit conglomerate in this country, 90%, if not more, of the volume of alcohol sales, all come from these spirit conglomerates, all founded by white men, all still chaired by white men, led by. And so having the opportunity to build a spirit conglomerate, the very first ever to be built by a person who was not a white male, that can't happen with just Uncle Nearest. That has to be whiskey, there has to be cognac, there has to be tequila, there has to be vodka. And so Uncle Nearest is one pillar in this house that will pass to the next generation. This industry has an over 99% failure rate for new brands that launch. I'm one of the 1% to succeed. It would have been so easy to sell it for $1 billion and just go, I'm just gonna rest. But to know that my purpose is so much greater and that no matter how hard it was, there wasn't a price that they could buy this company for, and that I've stood my ground even when people were like, she has to have a number. She has to have a number. They've thrown every number at me and gotten the same response. No. That's what I'm most proud of.
My friend Bobby Gibson sent me that clip that I looked at remarkably in amazement. Now, I am not, a proponent. I'm not a liquor drinker and that sort of thing. But aside from that, we now are all those of us who are here, and I hope that you share this with other people, to see that story. But it is one that is a remarkable story. It's encouraging, and certainly it's a Black woman who, 48 years old, who has done this, and even her story in and of itself, leaving home at 15, because she didn't want to go along with the idea of her mother saying that she doesn't want any negative influence. Otherwise, she doesn't want to go along with looking at things in, I guess, their reality, because there are some negative things and there are some positive things, and everything, every day, you're going to have some challenges, and they're not all going to be feel good or positive challenges. There may be outcomes that may be positive, or the positive that you will learn from that negative experience, but dealing with the reality of what the experience was is where she was. And so, but the rules are the rules. If the adults of the house say that this is the way that it's got to be, that's the way that it's got to be. And if you don't want to live by those rules, then got to find another place to go to. So I think that for I think that when you look at those kinds of situations, and those are remarkable stories, I think that they're really so far more important than a lot of the other stuff that we see. And of course, we are not going to see the positive things that are being done. And again, talking about hidden histories of what Nearest Green, who was an enslaved person, And there are so many of those stories that you and I will never know about what enslaved peoples did that white men and women and white people are enjoying the riches of today as a result of what an enslaved person or persons, man or woman, men and women, did to allow for them generations later to thrive and benefit from this. That's why reparations is so important, why reparations is necessary. So the idea that people would say, well, he didn't have anything to do with what they did back then, and why am I responsible for it? Because you are a beneficiary of enslaved labor that has provided you with the kinds of luxury that you have for generations. So that is just one example of the affirmation and the absolute right position and perspective of reparations. We're going to talk about reparations sometime later because there have been many examples of reparations. So it's not a new thing. It's just one of those things that are controversial because it's Black people who are talking about reparations and advocating for reparation. But I think that reparation comes in many, many forms of reparation. Some of the things that are happening today, are things that could be a part of a process of reparation, right? Continued funding of HBCUs by the billions of dollars, improving and investing in state-of-the-art educational institutions in Black communities is a part of reparations. It all has to do with funding. It all has to do with money, but put in different areas of importance, in health, in mental. I mean, all across the spectrum, reparations and the resources for doing those things are money. Trillions of dollars that have to be put into place. Trillions of dollars have to be put into place. So reparations definitely is one about repairing that breach. Repairing that breach. There was an interesting study that was done that we're going to talk about. That was done. It's the democracy. They call it the DPI, and we're going to talk about the results of that. But over this last couple of weeks or so, we've seen how the Supreme Court and people like Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas both certainly compromised their position at the Supreme Court, and how the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, doesn't seem to want to institute any type of disciplines over the court. And if you don't have the courage to do that, and you are really concerned about the reputation of the court, and certainly your legacy of the court, not understanding why you want to be chief judge. We're talking about and Roberts. So, and of course, this latest news that have come out about Samuel Alito flying an upside down American flag, or having an upside down American flag flown in his front yard by his wife, that he claims that his wife did it. And he made all of these excuses about what his wife did. And isn't it a little funny that he would blame his wife, sort of like Adam blamed Eve when God gave the charge to Adam, and he allowed for his wife to go and be beguiled by the serpent. Then he wanted to blame his wife. Then he wanted to blame God. However, Samuel Alito is suggesting that he told his wife to take it down and asked his wife to take it down, and that his wife refused to do it. So Congressman Jamie Raskins talks about, and others are saying that Samuel Alito needs to, and then he also had this other flag that was seen being flown during the January 6th insurrection on one of his vacation properties. So it's clear where his position is about, the rioters of January 6th. But there is the constitutional and statutory standards that apply to the Supreme Court justices. The Constitution and other federal laws under it is the supreme law of the land. And the recusal statute explicitly treats Supreme Court justices as it does other judges. And this is what it says specifically. It says any justice, where it starts, any justice, judge, or magistrate, judge of the United States shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. The only justices in the federal judiciary are the ones on the Supreme Court. So the recusal statute, if triggered, is not a friendly suggestion. It is Congress's command that is binding on the justices, just as the due process clause is. Now, it is of no delusion that Justice John Roberts is going to institute that. In other words, they could be tried. They could be tried. It will never happen. But it is there in the Constitution. It's right there. So the idea that Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas should be making decisions or influencing decisions about what the immunity cases or any cases as it relates to the January 6th is very clear. But it's very clear to where our Supreme Court has come to, especially since they decided to allow for there to be, corporate bribery. Samuel Alito certainly was one of the authors of that decision that says that corporations could pay into as much money as they want to in terms of influencing political outcomes or campaigns and politicians of that sort. They can essentially buy justices and public officials. So that's where we are with that. But I guess we will see what those decisions are on how they rule. I guess they're trying to figure out how they can help the now convicted of 34 felony counts, Donald Trump, how they could help him to avoid these next two federal charges and essentially the state case in Georgia. And it's a question of whether or not they can impact the state case in Georgia because it is a state brought case. But we shall see how that will go. One of the things we want to talk about, we got Juneteenth that's coming up, and we're going to be participating in a couple of events. One out in Flossmoor on June, I believe that's June 17th, and then we're going to be participating on Juneteenth at the DuSable Museum. That's 10 by 10 to win, which is we are building the largest independent Black voting bloc that we can slate and select and elect people that we can have to represent the real interest equitably to our communities all across the diaspora of where we live in Chicago and the county of Cook and the state of Illinois, from education to economics. And it's if we build that power from the numbers that we have, which we have some large numbers of a Black electorate in Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois, that we could actually, for all intents and purposes, control the electoral process, or certainly greatly impact it to where the people who are in public offices that want to stay into public offices will have to respect our communities, and respect our communities not by doing these placebo type things that they do to I would say to be manipulative, or certainly to compromise us, coddle us, and that sort of thing. Give us a bunch of symbols without any real substance. But, I'm reading, I read this book and I'm reading it again because it's such a great book. And it's a book by Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr., who is the professor of African American histories at Princeton University, who wrote the book that we are the leaders we have been looking for. And it is a very good book that reminds us that the people that we are looking for to lead is really us. It is us that we need to organize ourselves in a way that things that we find that are not being representative, that are not being invested in, from education to economics, we can change those trajectories because they respond to numbers, whether it is dollars or whether it is votes. When I say dollars, big check, campaign contributions, or they look at the numbers, or both. right? So what we came up with is the whole idea of building an independent voting bloc that we can unify a large sect of the Black electorate, that we can organize it and we can self-support it, that we don't have to be dependent upon some outside source or sources to try and even compromise us. So we completely control the entire agenda and the entire apparatus. So if we were to build this independent voting bloc here in Chicago, Cook County, in the state of Illinois, which we absolutely have the wherewithal to do it, and we're slowly doing that and making those kinds of relationships across our organizational lines, our communal lines, our city lines, whether you're in the city of Chicago, whether you're in the city of Markham or Harvey or Riverdale or what is it, Robbins, all of the suburbs, southern suburbs, where we have 17 of those suburbs that are led by Black mayors in the suburbs. Many of those suburbs populations are 60 to 80% Black of those suburbs, the western suburbs. So in the Cook County diaspora or the Cook County footprint, we have significant access to those numbers. So all we're doing is asking that we organize a large fraction of that so that it is no longer the people in public office deciding for us the pool of candidates that we have to choose from. We can decide the pool of candidates that we want to run in these respective local elections, citywide, countywide, and statewide elections. And when you have that kind of power, then you have the power to influence policy. And influencing policy and establishing policy brings the revenue. Once it becomes a policy, once it becomes a law, there are funding that comes through that policy. So that is where we have failed to institutionalize. And there have been many, many leaders. If you go back to people like Fannie Lou Hamer and people like Marcus Garvey, people like, whether it's Farrakhan, whether it's Malcolm X, whether it's Dr. King, whether it was Jesse Jackson, whether it was local politicians, whether it was Baldwin or Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael. All of these people talked about that very thing of organizing. The one thing that we have never done is to institutionalize organizing ourselves, to have the kind of political strength to make demands and those demands be met. Or if those demands were not met, that we have the power to change the people in the public offices that refuse to deliver on the demands that we ask for. Now, we can't be afraid to do this, or we can't have, if we're going to transform conditions, and certainly if we're going to drive things like, again, I believe this is part and parcel of reparations. And in order to do that, you have to be in positions of power to make those kinds of objectives come into fruition. They're not going to come into fruition continuing to function the way that we have been functioning in the past, and then continuing to function the way we do. I showed some numbers from the primary election, which is in many respects the general election for Illinois. And in the primary elections in the southern suburbs, there was only about 17% of the electorate that participated. In the city of Chicago, I think the number got up to about 26% or something like that. I forget the numbers offhand, but whatever, they were very low. And so in some of the meetings, we looked at and analyzed the numbers and we said that if we had built 20% of the goal of 10 by 10, which is 1 million, if we had built 20% of that, which would be 200,000 people, and 200,000 people in the tent of 10 by 10 to win in our voting block, which is for all intents and purposes, our union voting block, which means that we would have covered primarily all of our district lines. If we had just done that in the 20 wards that we're in, if we had just 10,000 people in the 20 wards that we're in, that's 10,000 people that we're able to put boots on the ground to go and to advocate on people that we have selected, right, to support. We would have swept much of the elections in the primaries, because if you looked at the numbers of the votes in the districts and votes in the wards, many of them didn't even have 10,000 people that voted. Even in the districts, if we had 10,000 people, we would have had 10,000 people to have boots on the ground, that we would have been able to garner a significant number of seats if we had determined elections. Now, how do we do that? And the way that we do that is that we're able to find out and find people from within that are interested in running for public office and support those people, making sure that we get people who have the real commitment to public service, and people who have the character and the courage to go into these public spaces and to make the kinds of demands, and then building a team within that so that they have support within those governmental bodies that they're elected to by us, to go in to be able to champion those policies, right? So that is what is important. Now, how do we get to that place? So why it is called 10 by 10 to win. 10 by 10 to win is because all of us know some people that trust us, that we are people that they trust. You know someone that you trust to provide you with information in certain areas that you know that they could, you could go to them for advice, and you could largely trust that. So the point is that we have people who we can get. So if we were bringing people in our trusted circles, right? If we're bringing people in our trusted circles to say, This is what we are doing across our communal lines, across our districts. Let's be a part of this. Let's strengthen our voices so that we can really have control and make the decisions about people who we want, and that we can influence and impact and support to move our agenda forward, right? Because we have many people who look like us in public office, but in many respects, they are supporting the agendas of those who financed them. Because we didn't pick them. They didn't come to us and have a conversations in our communities, in your communities, about the very candidates that ended up becoming elected. You know people who were interested and people who actually ran who would have been good public servants, but they didn't have the support. They certainly didn't have campaign dollars, but they didn't have the support. And if we were to build this infrastructure, if we continue to building this infrastructure as we're doing, and we build that infrastructure to have the kinds of foundation that we envision it to be, we will have national implications on how we can get a national ideology on how we impact elections nationally. But locally is where we have to make the inroads, because that's where extremist groups are joining school boards and running for local city councils and running for, in our case, we're going to be having people who are being appointed to the school board, people who are running for seats on the school boards, people who are running for commissioners, running for alder persons, and running for mayors, and running for positions in the trustees in different villages and that sort of thing. We do need to have people across all of these varying positions that have a synthesis of the message, right, to support agendas that are going to be equitable for our communities. Not to get into positions to compromise our communities, but they won't be able to compromise our communities if we put them there, because building the infrastructure that put them there holds them accountable to making sure that they don't cross the line. And if they do cross the line, we have the apparatus to say, this person is not working in the interest of our people. Let's pick someone else from within and replace those persons. That's the power. When you're able to say, that's not working for us, and we're going to make that change, and we have the wherewithal to make that change through the numbers, regardless of somebody's checkbook, that is where the real power is. That's where the real power is. When we're able to say to people who have compromised or who have abdicated the commitment to making sure that they're representing the equity of our communities, that we're able to make those changes. That is real power. Power that we have never had. Never. Somebody says, well, what do you mean never? We've never had it because we've never, as a people, organized, not around or around a personality, but collectively throughout all of us. Wherever you see 10 by 10 to win, you see us all, and everybody looks the same, meaning we're uniform the same. There's no when you see the group, and this is the vision, wherever we're out in public and people see 10 by 10, they see the collective of our community. They see the collective of our community. And that's where we have to be, looking outside of ourselves for the whole and not for the individual. Individualism is a toxic, suicidal mission for the advancement and the liberation of Black people. Individually, Black people have been doing well if you go all the way back to slavery times. The house slaves enjoyed privileges that the field slaves did not. They slept inside a warm or cool home, nice bed or nice clothes, ate, cooked meals, and all of those accoutrements that they enjoyed, but they were still slaves. We don't have to be individually, and we don't have to be in a situation where just a few people are making it through that hole in the fence syndrome. We can elevate people in our community all across the diaspora, and we can certainly impact the political apparatus. I always think about the example of the United Auto Workers and what they were able to do. This group of 400,000 active members in the United States and Canada of the United Auto Workers that started out with a small strike and set the parameters to expand that strike if the powers that be, the CEOs of those auto plants, were not willing to keep their part of the deal. But keep their part of the deal that the workers agreed to over 10 years ago to forego and sacrifice of increases, salary increases, raises, and loan that money to the manufacturers that so that they can keep the company strong, make the company strong, make them vital, and they promise to give them the money back when the companies were healthier. Well, the companies became healthier. Not only did they become healthier, they became healthier on steroids. But these 400,000 members called in, said, it's time. But the CEOs, who had been getting record bonuses, and companies were enjoying trillions of dollars in profits, record profits, and they claimed that they would not do it because they could not do it. Well, the workers said, okay, we've tried to negotiate. We've tried to make the demands, and you all decided that you're going to stand firm on your position, and you're not going to be fair about it. Well, what they decided was that they're going to strike, and they did. They struck. At first, it was not. They were not getting the kinds of responses from the CEOs, but then they said they were going to ride in this strike. 400,000 people, members in the United States and Canada. And those 400,000 people influence other people that they know and trust them. Again, look at the trusted circle. But only 400,000 people that are members. That membership and that strike forced the first sitting presidents in 250 years to go stand on a picket line. Never in the history of this country has a president stood on a picket line. But he did it because of the power that 400,000 people across this country and what they were demonstrating. We, right here in Chicago, are 660,000 registered voters, not just the population, 660,000 registered voters. That is the largest block of registered voters of any ethnic group in Chicago. If you go out through the diaspora of Cook County, that number widens. So if we would just commit ourselves and say, okay, let's participate and let's all do this thing. Now, of course, people will always say, how are we going to compete with the big? Now, again, the local politics influences what happens nationally. Local to state to national. Because we are largely impacted by our local and state governing and governing bodies, which is why we have to participate so strongly to send messages to the broader diaspora federally. So how do we compete? Now, so that we're not overtaxing anybody, because in many of these efforts, in most of these efforts, for most of the time, we have fewer people that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And it is very difficult to make significant progress that way. But if you have more people participating, then the weight is not overtaxing anyone, but you're having a large thrust. How do you get the large thrust? You get the large thrust because that makes it easier, like pushing a car down the road. If one person gets behind a car and tries to push that car, they may push the car and get that car to moving a little bit, but it's going to be pretty heavy for one person to push a car that is a few tons. If two people get behind and start pushing, it gets a little bit lighter. If three people gets behind, it gets more easier. If four people starts pushing that car, it becomes easier. If five people start pushing that car, the same car, but five people pushing it, it takes the weight off of each person and makes it easier to push the car, to get the car down the road. The same thing here, that if we were to break down all of our idiosyncrasies that we have, right? Break down all of our idiosyncrasies, and we say to each other, all right, I'm going to get the people in my trusted circle, and we're going to join the people in our organizations. We're going to connect ourselves, And we're going to be this tightly woven tent where we have our organizations from education to economics to whatever the social, political concerns are. And we have people who have all of the talents, people who have all the information, who can articulate the ideas, who can articulate the needs. And those people who are leading those efforts, now the entire diaspora is supporting that person or that issue or that group or that organization. The entire body of 10 by 10 to win is there to support that person, whether they have to go to Springfield, whether they have to go to city council, wherever they have to go. The entire body is supporting them. If we have to elect people in a local village, we're on the grounds campaigning for the people who are running for the village mayor and the trustees in those areas. And we're putting people from 10 by 10 to win in those prospective offices all across our governing areas in the city, in the suburbs, in the diaspora where we are, so that we have garnered real collective power, that we now have a real live Black caucus, that those people can come together along with the rest of the diaspora, and we're having discussions and ideas, and they are responding to the constituents. That's a real democratic process. That's real representative government. That's real power. We don't have it today. We have the opportunity, and we certainly have the ability to do it. And all we have to do is reach out to those in our trusted circles and say, let's build the power base. Let's organize for ourselves. And then together, we collectively make the demands. We collectively set the table. We set the agenda. Not a few people who, we hear these colloquial sayings about, this is the party boss. We shouldn't have any party bosses. We as the electorate should be the people who makes the determination on who it is that we entrust an office to represent us, not some individual so-called party boss who dictates to us, who tells us rather than talking to us. I don't need someone telling us what to do. We don't need anybody telling us what to do. It is the reverse. We need to make sure that we have people who hears us, who respects us. We have people who clearly don't respect us and brag about ignoring us. Now, the truth is that most of us couldn't pick up the phone and call a person in elected office, or if we pick up the phone and call somebody in elective office, we have to get on their schedule, which may be 3 weeks away. But I guarantee you that if we build this infrastructure, I guarantee you that that attitude will change. Why? Because the people who would be voters in their districts, in their wards, we are in a collective body. We're in an organized collective body that every person in a public position recognizes and respects. And we will be able to get to see what real power is, because those people will be running to have a conversation with the diaspora. I don't care where it is, whether you're in Olympia Fields, whether you're in Flossmoor, whether you're in Homewood, whether you're in Country Club Hills, Hazel Crest, I don't care where they are, City of Chicago, whoever the mayor is. Currently it's Brandon Johnson, whoever the Cook County Board President. Currently it's Tony Pretwinkle. I guarantee you right now, before we even got, if we were to do this before, say, the DNC, right? Let's just use August. We were to build 200,000 people. There's a whole different response on how they would be responding. Completely different response, completely different level of respect to you as to how they would be responding to us. Again, not as an individual, but as a collective, because how we make decisions based on the majority. That's how we make decisions. There is no unilateral decision made by me or anyone. That decision, any decision that is carried, is one that is voted on by the diaspora. So of 10 by 10 to win. So that means when there are major decisions to be made, then we come together, and we're talking about voting at this point. So if we're talking about elections, we come together and we find out from our own, within our own, who it is that has an interest for running for public office in respective areas, wherever ward you may live, or commissioner seat, or state representative, or state senator. Then what we do is we find out and get a consensus on who those people are. And then we're going to have internal elections. And having internal elections for those respective seats, it has to be the philosophy that whoever becomes the person within that gets the majority support, then the whole supports that particular candidate in those areas. So that means that we're supporting however many people in the different districts or different wards became the winner of the majority vote. Those are the people that now we're going to work to get on the ballot, getting them on the ballot. Then we are working to make sure they get elected. And we're voting in that way. So if we have 20 wards where we largely live in the city of Chicago, which we do, we have 20 wards. And in those 20 wards, the goal is to make sure that we have a minimum of 10,000 people in each ward. And in 20 wards, 10,000 people, that's 200,000 people. And then in our suburbs where we are, because our suburbs are smaller communities. Some suburbs communities maybe, I don't know, 7,000, 8,000 people, whatever the number is. We want to make sure that we're working to build in every area, every district, that we are covered, that we have blanketed. There is no district, state rep, state senate, commission, mayor in the suburbs, in the city of Chicago, no aldermanic, mayor, mayoral, county commissioner. All of them are covered. All of them are covered. This is something where we now have organized real power. And that is the purpose of it. When you organize that way, you can influence what happens in terms of representation and public policy. If we were to do that before the first ballot or the first election, I guarantee you the people who are there now who wouldn't talk to us before we could easily get an audience with most of them, including mayors and governors, because now the people have really organized power. That's what we have done when we make that kind of accomplishment, when we make that kind of effort. Now, if we do not do that, we must not, well, we will, some will, but we can't really complain if we're not really willing to abandon what we have been doing before, when we know better and when we now know how we have to do it, and then there is a way for us to do it, and that we don't do it, then we're basically saying we are okay with the status quo. I don't know too many people who are okay with the status quo, that really, really are people who are concerned about what's going on. I just don't, I don't know too many people who are happy with the status quo, unless there are people who are compromised. Or you have some people who are doing individually okay, and they can become anesthetized to saying, you know, I'm doing okay. My family is okay. Things are pretty good with my family. And in a lot of cases, individually, that may be so. But on a wider basis, it's not good for our communities. You know, I went through some numbers, give you an idea. The median income for Barrington, Illinois is $126,250. For Orland Park, it's $89,491,000. For Ravenswood on the north side is $60,457. That's the median income as reported in 2023. In Lincoln Park, it's $149,773. Under $25,000. Now get this by percentage. Under $25,000, less than 12% of the people in Lincoln Park earn less than $25,000 or $25,000 or less. From 25,000 to 44,000, 7%. From 45,000 to 78,000, 28%. $150,000 and up, 42% of the people in Lincoln Park. On the south side and the west side, the median income is $46,410. $46,410 is the median income for the south side and the west sides of Chicago. That's what the median income is. So these are the disparities, and this is based on policies of investment in these communities, from education to economics. On the south side of Chicago, the average of 30 people for every good paying job. On the north side of Chicago, there's 30 good paying jobs to the average working person on the north side of Chicago. That's the difference between the economic divide between Chicago's south and west sides of Chicago. In 1980, on the 1950s and 1960s and the 1970s, 70% of all employment in the city of Chicago, 70% of all employment in the city of Chicago was in labor, was in manufacturing. 1980, Ronald Reagan came into office, stopped enforcing the antitrust laws for these conglomerates, and these corporates. By 1987, it had gone from 70% down to 28% in 7 years. And now that number is less than 10%. Nobody has had a real urban plan about dealing with those situations. I've given a plan that is worked out in Mississippi, in the poorest region of the country, to the previous mayor to look at, given it to the current mayor to look at, nothing of the sort. We now have policies that were passed federally that are providing monies to garner industries to come and build in their states and in their cities, bringing good paying jobs in advanced manufacturing across the spectrum. In Illinois, the average manufacturing starting wage is $89,000 a year. 89,000. We need to see that happening on the southeast side of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, on the southwest side of Chicago, in Inglewood. And when you have that kind of economic building, then guess what happens? All of the negative indices start to go down. Increase the economic wealth, decrease the other problems that we have, violence, crime. You don't have to have violence intervention organizations. They don't have violence intervention organizations on the north side of Chicago, in Lincolnwood, in Lincoln Park, in Ravenswood. They don't have that. They have economics. They have, wealth that they can put together and make sure that they have holistic programs in place for their young people to do in the summertime when they're out of school. I told you last week, Mayor Brandon Johnson came to the south side of Chicago on last Friday and did a dog and pony show of a bunch of symbolism with no substance. I'm being very critical of that. Will Hall, who is now my alderman of the 6th Ward, brought 200 black men together. I was sent a message to go there, 200 black men. I didn't know what it was about. To go there and listen to them give some placebo of a speech, and then to announce the $6 billion investment of O'Hara Airport on the south side of Chicago is where they were making this announcement. Not a $6 billion investment on the south side of Chicago, but a $6 billion investment of a remakeover at O'Hara Airport, where they've spent billions and billions of dollars remaking over the same airport. While we haven't had a $1 billion investment on the south side or the west side in more than 30 years. But they came to the south side to make that announcement. Ridiculous, right? Okay. So why do you think that they can do that and get away with doing that? What I say is because we haven't organized ourselves to force policies that we want to have in place and that should be in place, and the investments that should be in place. We should have an economic development team that is bringing industry to the south and west sides of Chicago, to the Inglewood communities of Chicago, setting up their businesses and giving those people and those companies the tax breaks to bring economic development in these communities, where you have communities of Black males at between the ages of 18 and 25 that are out of work and out of school at the rate of 47%. Teenagers between the ages of 16 and 18 that are out of work and out of school at the rate of 17%, to their white male counterpart at 7%. This is what we have to address, but we cannot address this and will not address this if we spend all of our time focused on gay people or focused on LGBTQT, because it's not LGBTQT people who are writing legislation, funding legislation. Gay people are not your problem. These are people who are heterosexual people, men and women in legislative positions that are voting on policies that don't include equitable representation. So we've got to get our heads out of the sand and get focused. We've got to be willing to connect ourselves together first to get focus. You can't get focus on an agenda and to win that agenda unless you have a team strong enough to push that agenda. You can't win a basketball game. You can't win a football game. You can't win a baseball game. You can't win a softball game unless you've got a good team on the field. Once you got a good team, then you can strategize and you can coordinate and you can practice and you can become like a well-oiled machine that is powerful to move agendas with results and positive outcomes, not to be anti anyone. Being pro equitable Black communities is not synonymous with being anti anybody. What we are is anti poverty. We are anti economic deprivation. We are anti educational deprivation. That's what we are, anti, not people. Policies and principles that persist to keep our communities weak. That's what we're about. That's what we should be about. That's what we should be focused on. And when we focus on making those things happen, guess what happens when you have more people working, more people earning career earnings, lifting people out of poverty, getting people out of poverty, earning good salaries. Those people are able to save money. They're able to buy homes, cars, goods and services. And more people are able to start businesses that are able to be supported in our communities, to enrich our communities, to have people selling goods that we use that look like us, to us, where our people have the wherewithal to be able to go and buy in inventory, shelves, stores, mental health facilities that we need, and health facilities that we need, and have wonderful parks that we want and need in our communities, like they have on the north side of Chicago, that we could have on the south and west sides of Chicago. We can reduce crime. We can reduce violence by reducing poverty. You're not going to reduce crime. You're not going to reduce poverty. You're not going to reduce, violence with more police. You're going to reduce those areas with building a strong economic base. That is what we must do and how we have to get focused. But we can't do that if we are not going to be willing to implement a strategy of power. And the strategy of power is bringing ourselves together as one collective body that we can organize, we can argue our points, we can debate, we can deliberate, we can deliver, and we can come out and we can see the results of something that we have not done. Want something you've never done? You got to do something that you haven't done. Want something that you don't have? You got to do something that we've never done to get it. We've got to go in a direction and with a strategy that is pretty fundamental. That's pretty fundamental. And it can't be the me, myself, and I attitude. We've got to abandon that if we plan or if we want to move differently, if we want to get different outcomes from the people who are currently in positions. I remind us about the United Working Families. United Working Families is more than 500,000 people in United Working Families. United Working Families was started, I believe in 2010, 2011, somewhere around there, organized by people like Brandon Johnson and Stacey Davis Gates and others from the Chicago Teachers Union. But the United Working Families is largely populated by people who don't look like people in our communities. And they have been able to influence and impact elections, obviously. And as a result of that, the current administration has to make sure that equitably that they respond to where they know the numbers are. And all I'm saying to us, then let's put our numbers together so we have even more power and more strength, because no one can get elected to an office in Chicago, in Cook County, in the state of Illinois, without coming through the black vote, period. So since we do have that, let us control it and organize it and use it to our benefit, to our determination, that if somebody wants our support, they have to be able to deliver to our communities. We know what our communities need. We know what our communities must have. And so now we know what our communities must do. The question will be, how can we bridge this this uncorporation? How can we bridge it? How can we bridge it all together, 10 by 10 to win? How can we do that? How can we build that umbrella to cover all of our organizations that's doing great work and support the work that individual organizations are doing, but with a mighty thrust behind that work? So imagine this. We have organizations for education. We have organization for criminal justice reform, healthcare, housing, all of these areas, economics, right? So we have these different areas, but we have organizations, many organizations that are doing great work in all of those areas. But They're not able to make the kinds of inroads that they could make with stronger support behind them. So what I'm talking about is repositioning ourselves with the resources that we currently have, so that we are strengthening ourselves to be the directors, and rather than being directed, we do the directing of the people who are in public office that's supposed to be working for us. That is what we should be about. Look, next week, we're going to have this conversation about our judicial system and learn more about that. But I am going to continue to encourage us to try and nudge us to taking control of our destiny. I think that we in Chicago and Cook County can be the example for the Black diaspora around the country and frankly around the world about what being organized really produces, what it really produces. So I'm asking you to please join us. Join the weekly meeting. We have people who are from all over, all suburbs, well, not all suburbs, but many suburbs, who are becoming a part. People all across the south side and the west sides of Chicago that are becoming a part. And if you have not joined us, this does not require money. There's no registration fee or anything like that, because you have to build a team first, and then the money itself will take care of itself. But I want to just give you an example. Assume that we had 200,000 people. Assume we had 200,000 people. And the 200,000 people gave $5 a month. That's $1 million a month. That's enough money for us to run any candidate in any office and win that we want to in the city of Chicago, Cook County. $12 million a year. We could use those monies to run all of the candidates that we need to run in local spaces and all that sort of stuff. And that's what the funds will be used for, not to pay big salaries and all that sort of thing, but to use those dollars. Then we don't need to, worry about somebody from the outside compromising our system. It is a holistic system that is self-determined by all of us, that it can't be poisoned if all of us insulate it. So $5 a month is a little bit, remember, it's like pushing the car down the road. More people pushing the car, the less tax that anyone has to be, and everybody can participate, and it can be just as powerful and just as strong. We could run people and make sure that they have the kinds of awareness, the campaigns that they need to have, to hire the kind of political consultants that we need to have. And in a lot of respects, we don't have to have as many political consultants because we've got so many boots on the ground going in the same direction, because we collectively have determined the people that we're going to support as candidates. The layers are all there once we build the infrastructure. All of the layers are there. Then we crystallize and coordinate and organize who and responsibilities and all of those sort of things that we have to do to have this well-oiled, organized organism. of Black people that other people don't expect or don't even think could happen. But if we determine to make it happen, it will happen. All right, well, listen, that is, I'm going to leave it there for now. But I see your comments, but I'm simply saying, let's get out of the negativity and let's focus on the things that really matter to us, that matter to our communities. Let's get real focused on that. All right. So if you would, I'm going to put it in the chat. All right. Just text so that you can receive the Zoom link for the Thursday night meeting. I'll put it in the chat, the telephone number that you can do it. So it's text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385. And on Thursday, you'll receive the text alert for the Zoom link meeting. Come to just one of the meetings. Just come to one of the meetings and hear and see, participate with the others, and you can invite others to do that. And let's make it grow and make it happen. Then we can empower ourselves in ways that, frankly, we will surprise all of ourselves, because we've never done this before. We've never institutionalized it so that it can be a functioning body rather than a sort of a enigma or something that happens where people, try to coddle us. That we are the ones who are organizing it. We can actually do that. All right, well, listen, that's going to do it for this week's edition of The People Show on intellectualradio.com, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. You can go back and listen to it on iHeart Radio through intellectualradio.com as well. And you can go on my Facebook page and you can certainly share this with your other network. I think that those stories that I showed earlier, and we're going to show some others. Have my producer to provide us. We're going to try to show those enlightening stories that we may not necessarily have learned about or know about on a regular basis, whether it be weekly or monthly or however, whenever we come to learn about them. We certainly want to share them with the rest of our people. All right, so I want to thank all of you for tuning in for this week's edition of The People Show on intellectualradio.com, and we will certainly see you next week for the Monday night edition of The People Show. Remember, being engaged in our process is not a spectator sport. We must all get active to be engaged to make a difference. All right, good night. Thank you all for tuning in to this Monday night's edition of The People Show. Take care.